Justin Mitchell has recently become the owner of the CrossPoint GitHub organization. If you don't know what CrossPoint is, how did you even get here? But for those who genuinely don't know, CrossPoint is an open source firmware project for the Xteink X4 and Xteink X3 e-readers that has become the go-to firmware for these two devices. Today, I had the privilege of interviewing Justin to learn more about him, his plans for CrossPoint, and even a meeting he had with Xteink's CEO where they discussed some really interesting topics. So, if that sounds interesting to you, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel, and let's get into the interview. So welcome, Justin. Thank you for taking the time for this interview.
Of course, glad to be here.
So my first question would be, what is your open source background? Have you done some really cool projects in the past that you're really proud of? What were those, or what is your background in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is a startup founder. I've been doing this since I was 15, just building software, building cool things. I had a couple successes early on in life. And as part of my first startup IPOing, I decided that I really didn't want to focus on only one thing in life. And I went to agency days and then built some fun side projects on the side. And when you do that, you interact with open source a lot. And as part of me going out and leveraging a lot of these open source packages and libraries, I wanted to give back. And so I started, contributing to various open source projects. Part of kind of my methodology in open source contribution is really what led me to CrossPoint, actually, which was just going out there and seeing the stuff that I enjoy, looking at the issues, the open PRs, and saying, all right, this is what the people are asking for. I see these open issues, or I see these things on Reddit or wherever it might be. I can knock that out. It's no different than, the startup founder mentality of seeing a hole in the market, wanting to fill it with a product, and, going out there and building something. Only in this case, you already have a captive audience. You don't have to market it. You don't have to sell it. You have someone begging for someone to please fix this issue or add this feature, to this repository. And it's really easy to go in there, knock that stuff out, start giving back to the community. So that's really where I started. I've got some open source Flutter packages. Pretty much all of the applications that I build now, I open source. So that's not necessarily contributing to an existing ecosystem, but just saying, look, I figured some cool stuff out in this, software. I hope somebody else can leverage it. And so a lot of the stuff that I build now, I just default to open sourcing it.
Cool. You said you had like a lot of success at the beginning or something like that, right? Do you mind to share what kind of project that was? Was it a singular project or something like more?
Yeah, so when I was 17, I co-founded my first startup with a bunch of folks that I used to work at another company with, and it was a hardware product, actually using e-ink screens. So I know a
Oh.
lot about
Hmm.
memory LCDs and e-ink, and I was really involved in the Pebble ecosystem at that time as well with the Pebble watches. So I've been a big stand for e-ink for a long time. In fact, actually, our first investor pitch that we ever did, because we couldn't afford custom hardware yet, I jailbroke a Kindle, ran a custom Linux instance on it, and then we wrote like a little Linux app that ran on a Kindle, and that was the first version of my product that ever existed, was running on a jailbroken Kindle. So I've been doing e-ink stuff for a really long time. I love the hardware. I'm an avid reader myself, and so it's fun to kind of see the full circle moment and come back to these e-reader technologies.
Awesome. And what was the first time that you've like seen the CrossPoint project? What was like the your first interaction with it? When was that?
Yeah, so I have been buying these little Chinese e-readers for a really long time. Different ones that you find on Amazon or on AliExpress, and I got Reddit fluenced pretty hard on the X4. I think Reddit recently, TikToked their algorithm pretty well, because this was not a sub that I was following. I don't even know how it ended up on my front page so much, but I kept seeing these tiny little e-readers, and I was like, man, that's gotta be just garbage. Like, it's so small, the resolution's gotta be terrible. Like, who wants to read like that? And I just kept seeing it week after week after week. And so I think I ended up buying one around January. It might have been December, January, something like that. Um, and of course, you get the software and you're like, "Oh, man, the stock is rough. Like, this is not what I think I could, use daily."
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I started
back
looking
then
into, like,
it was even worse back then,
it was
right?
it was pretty rough.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot better recently, but, started looking into it. The big thing for me was the reading experience, like, spaces all over the place, and, like, the font just looked really unpleasant. Oddly enough, and this is, I think testament to our users is like font choice is really important. And so I kind of started looking like, how do I swap the font out? And that led me to CrossPoint, which at that time happened to include some amazing reader fonts that we won't name on this interview itself. But the community was really, behind, and obviously it's a good font for reading on these e-ink devices. And so I immediately was like, oh, I got to get this on my device. Obviously, huge upgrade. Loved, getting the software on there. And then, like I said before, literally my first step was just to go look at the open discussions and open issues. And I saw KO Reader support, KO Sync support, and like the ability to download stuff remotely somehow. And so my first thought was like, well, those are really easy things to knock out. Now, kind of tangentially to this conversation, I've been personally thinking about like I really want to create a digital only library experience. Libby is awesome, Overdrive's amazing, but in an e-ink world, you're pretty much stuck to most of the time using it on like an Android device, which is inherently distracting, doesn't have the best battery life. And you end up kind of making all these compromises. And I realized that the thing that I love the most about the X4 was that it was pocketable and I can always have it with me. And I really was like, wow, I'm cutting down on my, TikTok habit, my scrolling, my social media, my doom scrolling habit so much. And that was such an amazing habit unlock for me. And the thing that was missing was like the ability to push that progress to a bigger reader when I wanted it to, or to be able to get books on that on the go really easily. And so those are the first two things that I knocked out was doing KO Reader and OPDS, which is the open format that like your Calibre server or Caliber server, that's how you pronounce it technically, can host on your computer. And so my first thought was like, well, if I solve these two things, maybe that will open this ecosystem up a little bit more for people who are, tenuously, unsure about if they could move to such a niche device. Let's make it easier for them to get books on there and make it easier for this to not necessarily be the only way that they read those books. And so those are the first things I knocked out, and they were received really well. And what was cool about that for me was that validation was like immediate. The community loved it. Dave like literally reached out on the PR and was like, "Wow, these are really big unlocks for us. Thanks for doing that." And there was kind of this click moment. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. Like, I think I'm just going to keep finding holes that I can fill that will round out this software so that it's not such a nichey technical thing. And it's actually something that I could give to someone who's relatively non technical and they can have a pretty good reading experience on it.
Cool. So that was your first contribution to CrossPoint. Awesome. Yeah. To
Yeah.
me, that sounds like a pretty big pull request, to be honest. Like this sort of. But you just weren't there any easier ones? You just thought this is my expertise, so I might as well do
You
it. Or
know, I think this is a hot button topic in the community for sure, but with the advent of things like Claude Code, a lot of stuff that wasn't possible before or would have been a lot more difficult was really easy. And so for like something like KO Sync, it was really easy for me to point Claude Code at the KO Sync open source, that already exists and KO Reader and say like, how's it work? Like, how does their authentication servers work? How does the syncing work? Just like tell me how this functions. So I don't have to go read a bunch of Lua files, right? And then from there, integrating it into the system, it's just some basic HTTP calls. It's not that big of a deal. It's actually a really, really simple system that they use. And so, the bigger thing was the next PR, which was fully supporting the X3. So when the X3 initially went up for pre-order, I set an alarm on my phone, immediately pre-ordered 2 units, like within minutes. And part of that was I wanted to be the first person to support that on CrossPoint. And I was. It took 3 months, unfortunately, for the PR to get merged. And it was a lot of work guessing at how do I drive this e-paper display. But that was the next thing that I really did was supporting the X3. And Yeah, we talk about a big PR. That was a really big one. That touched the community SDK, that touched all of the e-reader activities. And it was a completely handwritten, e-paper driver that was put in because we didn't really have any documentation on it at the time. So I was guessing at a lot of what looked good visually, what was even capable of driving the display. And we're still doing a lot of that today. There's a lot of improvements for the X3 that are coming soon.
Sounds good. Sounds really interesting. Do you think that helped you then during the when you became the owner of the CrossPoint organization on GitHub last week? Do you think that helped you being like this the guy that basically went out of his way to develop this thing on the X3?
For sure. I think there was definitely a lot of goodwill. What ended up really happening was because the PR had taken so long to get merged, I had become sort of this figurehead in Reddit because everyone knew that it wasn't officially supported yet. But I was just like building bin files on my own computer and just like zipping them and sending them to people. So I became this like legend of like, oh, if you have an X3, just go talk to this guy. Like he's got the information. It was like, tag you Dirge on Reddit. He's got the bin file. He can give it to you. And so there was this like sense of community involvement that was already building up. In fact, there was a good amount of confusion where a lot of people just thought I was Dave for a lot of the time, and I had to always correct them and be like, "No, I'm just a random guy. I already did the work. I just want to share it with you guys, and you have X3s, and I want you to get on CrossPoint. So here, I'll do some extra effort." And that I think honestly is a lot of the genesis of me eventually coming to own, the repo was simply I was so involved in the community. I was doing so much tech support. Obviously, you might get into some of these questions later, but that bleeds into the website, the unlocker tool, and all these other things. Is it ended up just kind of being this natural turn of events where people were coming to me as the face, even though I wasn't remotely the face. And I'd been hitting Dave up in Reddit DMs for a while, basically saying, "Look, man, if you ever get bored of this, like, I would love to buy it off of you." Like, and to his credit and the credit of others, the response was always like, "Why would you buy an open source GitHub repo? Like, it's open source. Like, just make your own fork." But from my perspective, the community was already there. I don't want to try and compete with that. As we talked at the very beginning, the reason why I a lot of times love contributing to open source is I don't have to do any marketing. I don't have to do any selling. Like the community's already there. There's already eyeballs on it. I don't have to figure that piece out. I just get to build, which is the thing that I enjoy the most. And so, when it came to Crosspoint, I was like, look, I don't have any desire to compete or try and bring people over from, the main, point of contact. I would rather just, have a little bit more control over it so that I don't have to feel like I'm stepping on toes or doing something that maybe you wouldn't do or, thinking through all of my PRs to be like, is this appropriate for where he wants the project to go? It just helps me, keep that vision a little bit more intact. And yeah, frankly, at the time, I was definitely one of the most visible community members, at least in terms of tech support and being really vocal, about the framework or the firmware.
Sounds good. Well, before we get to the unlocker tool, I wanted to ask you about how does the development actually look like from someone who has never owned like a big open source project. Everything I've ever did was basically a single member project. So I wonder, how does the development look? Is there like a core team, or is it a very like casual setting or something like that?
It's shifting for sure. What's funny is um, with kind of like Dave taking a step back for a little bit. He's got his own startup. He's a busy guy. It was almost like there was a lot less drama in the org because there was no clear face. So there was no one to complain to because nobody had anyone, to say anything to. And now that there is, kind of a core person in front of everything, it's like, oh well, now HR is here. All the complaints start rolling in, and that's totally fine. There's different personalities at play here. One of the things that I've been really upfront about is like no one is getting paid a salary to work on this. This is not a full-time job. We're not, a foundation. We're not a company. There's no entity here. This is all full volunteers of people who just are having fun. There's no gain outside of I saw a thing that interests me and I wanted to put in some effort into it. And so we've got about like 100 contributors. I would say there's definitely a top 5 out of that are core contributors. One of my favorite things that I see is quote unquote competing forks like CrossInk. Julia has really come into the fold lately and just done a ton of customer support in the Discord. She's PRing stuff back to the main repo that she either solves or are really cool features that she did in her firmware fork. And so seeing that community come back to the main source has been really awesome. And so, yeah, while we might have 100 contributors, I'd say there's a top 20 for sure. And then there's, your maintainers and a couple core members that are definitely more involved from not only a vision perspective. One of the things we've really struggled with, and you'll see this across open source in general, is this kind of problem of the AI slop,
Right.
agenda,
Mm-hmm.
which is that like
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
is so unbelievably easy to contribute now, but it's so hard to know if someone's contributing through the lens of a good development experience that they've already had or just through whatever Claude is outputting. And because it's open source, we're not collecting resumes, we're not checking credentials. The code really only speaks for itself. And depending on how good they are at AI, and even the best developers we have on the team, nobody is using AI, right? Like that would be silly. The difference, though, is that there is a skill in managing AI output code, and there's a skill in understanding what it did. And if you have zero understanding of both of those things, and you're just vibing your way to success, the difference between a mistake on something in Crosspoint and a mistake on something on the web is like 100x, right? Because on the web, it's like, oh, there's a bug, a 404 page happened, or an API call didn't get made. You do it on a firmware like this, the downstream impacts, if it's not caught, could be massive out of memory errors, bleeding on the screen, ghosting with the e-paper display. There's like a ton of like destructive things that can happen. And so that is one of the things that we're seeing as a challenge with such a visible open source project that is not necessarily like deeply technical like a LLM might be that people are contributing to, but it's kind of like a geeky nerdy gadget that appeals to a lot of people that aren't necessarily developers. It's something that like anyone who has ever played with a Raspberry Pi or some kind of other fun tech gadget wants to be involved in, that leads to is hundreds and hundreds of PRs. And you have to kind of go in there. And one of the things that I've really tried to do with my new ownership is just close, 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 right? Just, hey, this is out of scope. We really appreciate your contribution. We'll take a look at this in a little bit. We're not going to accept this at this time. Or, hey, you touched 23 files with 8,000 lines of code. This might be amazing code and it might be an amazing feature, but the risk is just so high to allow this into the code base right now. If you want to take another whack at it and see if we can do 3 files and 500 lines of code, I would love to take a look at it. The idea is solid. The risk is just too high right now. And we are not large enough of a team for someone to go through 8,000 lines of code, right? So there are judgment calls that have to be made. And due to the sheer visibility and size and AI boosting all of that, you do end up with sort of like your core group of maintainers, your core group of contributors, and we see people rise in the ranks every day. But that is kind of the nature of the beast right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the insight. My next question would actually be about the unlocking tool. So I think around a month ago, there was this controversy that someone received their device and it was sort of locked. And I was really surprised by how quickly the CrossPoint contributors and you, I think you said you built the website, right, responded to this. So how was that for you? When did you find out? How long did it take you? Were you, I don't know, did you immediately know what the solution will be and that it will work 100%? How was that for you?
Yeah, so we have a bot in our Discord that literally posts every new Reddit post in all like three of the XT subs. And so we know pretty quickly when it happened. Like I think we jumped on it, within a couple minutes of it being posted. Of course, this was for us a little bit of a, fire alarm, red alert moment where we're like, oh no, this could tank everything that we've been working on. And so for me, obviously there is the interest of the users, but there was a little bit of an interest in the community as well. All of these guys are working so absurdly hard for free, just putting blood, sweat, and tears into this firmware. And to have it all kind of like ripped away overnight was a big moment where I was like, wow, like that's not fair to all the people that have been working on this project. I gotta see if there's something that I can do. And so, immediately, uh, the thought crossed my mind of like, well, if I can't touch USB, we do know that all of the stock firmware advertises, an OTA update. I doubt that they're doing much validation on that, endpoint. Of course, we already know from our own code that we don't. And so, part of that being that doing intense amount of security and certificate stuff on these ESP32 devices is really memory intensive. And if you're trying to do an OTA update and you're trying to update firmware, the last thing you want to do is go out of memory in the middle of an update. So there was a good guess there of like, I assume that this is not, you know, blockable. Like, I'm sure someone could try really hard to block the OTA tool, and be successful, but in general, my assumption was, I think I can do this. And so, within 3 days, this thing was battle tested and fully functional. I think it happened, like, in the middle of a week or something, and I was like, "Just give me, like, a couple hours, and I think I'll have something." I had to delay maybe 1 or 2 days in there for work stuff, but eventually got it up and running, tested it myself a gazillion times, posted on Reddit and said, "Look, if you've got a locked device, I think I have a solution for you." This thing has gone through a million iterations since. We've got Windows, we have Linux, Raspberry Pi builds, so it's definitely, needed a lot of updates to get to the point where it's really stable now. Within 3 days, we had people that were on locked devices could now, move over to CrossPoint. Community response was obviously very positive. I think this bleeds into the website a little bit in that, we're serving two different audiences here. We have these incredibly technical people that are flashing things over serial, that are, writing code for this project. And then you have people that just want to read and they just want to read well and they're just consumers. And so, CrossPoint never had a website. Um, I saw a very long time ago, months ago, that crosspointreader.com was available. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to buy the domain. If anything ever comes of this, it means that I have it. And, before anything was official with Dave and handing the project over, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put a website out there that's got some general information about the thing, makes it look a little bit less like code project and more like a product. Um, and that led way for a very easy way to post things like our font builder that we have now and our unlocker tool and, gave me an avenue to offer nightly builds to, users. And so kind of consolidating everything, under that umbrella was really helpful. I think probably one of the biggest differences with just my mindset versus, what a lot of other open source projects have, or even this one in particular, is that I'm thinking of it like a startup, like a product, like a company, even if it isn't one, only because I know that there's an expectation from, customers that we offer things that do, fall under that umbrella. Obviously, we're not offering, actual customer service or support or refunds or, anything like that. But as long as you can package stuff up and attack it from a perspective of like, these are users, they are customers, this is a community, what are they asking for? What do they need? How can we help them? Versus this is functional, this is good code, it's clean. Like those things don't have to compete, but a lot of times you see one over the other. And I'm trying to find us a middle ground where we do have clean, good code, but we're also focusing on what people are asking for. And we're also hitting them where they're used to. The average consumer has no idea what GitHub is. They have no idea what a serial command is, right? Those are not things that they're familiar with. They know what a website is. They know what a download button is, right? And so trying to meet them where the average customer is has been sort of my goal.
Awesome. There was actually one question from a viewer of mine, and that was it actually has to do with the unlocker tool, and it was do you think there will ever be like now it's over the air, right? You even said that you didn't even try or bother like using the USB, right? You knew that it wouldn't work. Is there any way to do that to like basically bypass this as well, or is there like a hardware block or something?
It is basically they blow the E fuses on the debug interface and they're dead. There's nothing that
Oh,
we can
okay.
do once that's done. It's a irreversible thing. Now, I know we were gonna potentially get into this in a little bit, but I'll give a small spoiler alert here. I did have a very extensive conversation with the Xteink team. Talked directly with the CEO. Um, this obviously came up. Um, I think that they have probably fumbled some of the communication, and I'm hoping that I can help them with that moving forward. But it was very clear on that call that this was never meant to impact their overseas customers. I know this is kind of a funny way to have the conversation because we think of overseas as China, but they think of overseas as the US and other locations. So, overseas in this area, let's just call it the English version of the product, right? The Chinese version of the product, um, they had a lot of customers actually coming in, flashing Crosspoint, realizing that it wasn't optimized for Chinese, trying to flash back to stock, and then they were having issues. And this is obviously a customer base that we're not touching directly. Like, I'm not on Red I'm not interfacing with Chinese, users every day. And so this is probably even a customer support problem that was not even visible to us, right? And so I do have some empathy for them and understanding that like they have this core audience that is very different than our audience, and that the best decision for them at the time was we're just going to lock the devices if they're sold in this region because this is an unsustainable customer support problem. Now, the communication of that and it not coming before somebody received a device and it being really confusing at the beginning between where can you buy a device and when are you going to get it. And in fact, I told the CEO directly, we have community members confirming that they have bought a device directly from xtinc.com, which they have said will never be locked, which are locked. Now, the CEO looked at me very puzzled and said, that should never be happening. That is a full-on mistake if that is happening, and I will go talk to the factory and figure out why that happened. It's a small number of users, let's call it 10, 15 people. But that's a real problem, right? And I think that, hopefully they can honor, exchanges or something like that to get that, swapped out. But they are cutting it at the hardware level. There is nothing that we can do to restore that capability. Once it's been done. But rest assured that as long as you buy through the Xteink site, and I think TikTok and Amazon or something, but go support the company, buy direct from the website. Um, you won't get a locked device. The OTA unlocker tool that I built is definitely there for those who maybe don't have another choice. I know that the Xteink website doesn't ship to every country, and so you might have to get something off of AliExpress or something. The tool exists. It is definitely not perfect. We've done our best to support. So like almost every week now, somebody on Reddit says, "I flashed this random, bin off of GitHub, and now I can't get back to Crosspoint." That's because all these different developers have different OTA methods or different URLs or different package names. And so I'm patching this thing constantly just to make sure that it it can become a place that you can bounce between different firmwares very safely and not worry about getting stuck on one firmware. So that's getting better over time. Please, if you're using the OTA tool, check to make sure that firmware does support OTA updates. Please also make sure that if you're flashing it on an X3, that it supports X3. We've had a number of users brick their devices by flashing X4 only software on an X3. I did write recovery instructions for how you can blind OTA update without the screen working. Well, let me tell you, it's a pain in the butt. Nobody wants to go through that. We have recovered these devices for them, but I would rather not sit there and have to do that customer support. So please read the Gits. Make sure that they have OTA. Make sure that they support X3. There is a reason why flashing anything other than Crosspoint or Xteink in that tool is disabled behind a settings menu with lots of warnings and labels and checkboxes. It is not for the faint of heart. If you're going to do that, make sure you're reading all of the labels.
Okay, I will put that in the YouTube sections as the most important
Yes,
part.
please do.
Yeah, okay, I will. Then my penultimate question is actually, I read in the roadmap in the long-term section that there is actually support for additional ESP32 reading devices. That is something I didn't even thought of because for me, the Xteink right now, the X4 and even the X3 is basically like Crosspoint, right? The hardware is very impressive. I really, really like it, but I sort of feel that the software is like even a bigger portion than the hardware, right? So is that something? I know it says long term, it's in the long term section, but have you given this some thoughts, like more
Yeah,
than?
it is definitely a big goal of ours to make sure that Crosspoint is a amazing reading experience on any device we can make it run on. there are new devices being teased by Xteink that also run Android. And so we will eventually have to do something there if we want to, stay at front and center of a good reading experience. Is that a home theme? Is it a full on Android, ROM image? We don't know quite yet. What I will say is somewhere around here, yeah, I've got one of these Ham Geek M3s that you see the CrossPoint boot logo on right now. Um, we've got some M5 paper devices. We've pre-ordered EEGO A4s. I will say two things here. One, so far, no one comes remotely close to the hardware quality of the XT devices. Like the display is unbelievable. The touch or the buttons are awesome. I personally don't really want touch. Um, touch on this thing is not great. The display on it is terrible. So while that is a goal, um, I think for us, we're also looking at supporting a lot of community projects like D-Link, which is, kind of a open source DIY version of all of this stuff. And so we want to just make sure that we are not, I don't know, being selfish here and keeping it only to one hardware vendor. Um, I will say that in my conversations with the XT CEO, I mentioned something that we discovered recently, which was that there's a new company out there called Murphy. They have the M4. I believe they also technically made this M3, although they don't really advertise it too much. And they just came out with this big announcement saying that they have Murphy OS that they are very excited about. And it has all of these amazing features. And so someone in the community got a hold of a PDF, and I noticed that it had a Calibre plugin and an OPDS server and a KO sync feature. And I went, oh, that sounds a
Suspicious.
lot like
Yeah.
all of the stuff that I built. Um, and I grabbed a copy of their firmware off of their OTA server, decompiled it, and it is in fact CrossPoint. It is just literally CrossPoint with like Sudoku added and a UI skin on top. In fact, they even left our CrossPoint web server in there. It even says CrossPoint web server and all of our original HTML. Now I said this to the CEO of XT Inc. And one of the cool things that came out of this call that is a little bit of validation is he said, there is no doubt that CrossPoint has been a massive accelerator for EPUB rendering and e-ink readers in China. And that's both cool and not cool. It's not cool that this company just like forked it, closed sourced it, renamed it, and gave zero attribution. Um, there's nothing technically illegal about it. It's an MIT licensed software. But it is cool that we are already having impact on XT devices, right? And so that's happening whether or not we're involved or not. We might as well be the ones leading the charge. The focus right now definitely is still the XT device line. In my conversations with the team, we talked upcoming devices, making sure that we could get advanced support for that so that we're not lagging behind the physical release of the product, that we're already, done and ready by the time they start shipping. And so when it comes to, support for other devices, I have a very strong suspicion that you're going to see a very casual approach to supporting those other devices and a very uh, partnership level support for the XT devices, where it is something that we're working closely with them to make sure that there is quote unquote official support for it and that is a main focus. We certainly don't want to leave other devices behind. There's no reason why you should buy an e-reader, off of AliExpress and have a subpar reading experience if CrossPoint exists and we can do something about it.
Sounds good. So my last question is: you've touched on this a few times actually in this call already. So you've talked yesterday with the CEO and some of the other Xteink members, team members. And is there actually something that you haven't mentioned in this call that you talked about and is exciting and you could share with us?
So there's nothing inked on any paper anywhere. Again, I will remind the audience, CrossPoint is just a GitHub organization that I happen to be an owner of. There's no legal entity here. None of these folks are employees. I am a figurehead in face, but in no way, fully in charge of anything here. This is a community project. Nothing will be done without, full community support of it. But it was a very, very good conversation with the team. I talked with Henry, who a lot of you guys might know from the community. He's very active on Reddit. Talked to the COO, the CEO. It was an awesome conversation, honestly. The passion from the CEO really bled through on the call. I think a lot of times there's a desire to almost vilify, Chinese hardware companies for churning out cheap, profit-centered products that aren't really about customers. They're about how much can we copy somebody and put something out in the marketplace and make money. This guy legitimately loves reading. Like, he told me very personally and upfront, like, I wanted a pocketable reader because I like to read and I wanted to stop scrolling and I wanted to be reading more. And you could really tell that that was not BS. It really came through in conversations with him. And so, if I'm going to partner with somebody, that is the type of person that I want to partner with, because you could tell that there was true passion behind the product. We talked upcoming products, we talked long-term vision, we did talk, partnership opportunities, what that might look like. I am hoping that soon we'll have a way to guarantee that you're buying, XT devices that are unlocked directly through the CrossPoint website. So things like that are an opportunity that we're exploring. They recently partnered with a Chinese fork of CrossPoint called CrossLink. And so we're pushing sort of a story of, look, we have done an amazing job on our end of being um, very English focused, as well as having localizations for tons of other languages. In fact, as of a couple of hours ago, we merged right to left support for Hebrew and Arabic and things like that. These are things that they're not going to focus on. That's not their core audience. It's not who they're selling into. And it is where we're focusing. And so I do think there's a really big opportunity for us to say, you can have Crosslink, you can have stock, the China software, or there's this other option that has localizations for Dutch and Swedish and Spanish and Hebrew, and English is a first class, reading experience there. And we're working really heavily on EPUB rendering and hyphenation and lines and widths and paragraphs and all that stuff just to make it perfect for reading. There was some other stuff that was said that I think was really important to clear up. They sent a survey out a couple months ago, and they were asking things about like business cards and transit cards and AI and notes and all this stuff. And I think the community kind of looked at it and was like, those aren't reading things. Like, why are you on such a different page than us, oh company? And so talking with them, a lot of that really got cleared up in that, like, their Chinese audience, that is actually really important to them. That those are features that they actually want. There's, government grants that help with AI and integrating things like that. Just having QR codes available on your, device is helpful for a number of reasons. Transit, obviously, way bigger in China than it is here in terms of you being able to have transit cards, and their usage of phones is very different than our usage of phones here in the States, at least. And so I do think that those cultural differences are really important to consider in terms of like when we judge a lot of their communication. And so what was good about that conversation was my ability to go in and be like, I'm just letting you know, like, we don't care about any of that stuff. Like, we just want a really solid e-reader device. We want to read books on it. Um, you know, Having transit cards on this. Like, we all have phones. We're trying not to use, phone-like features. We're trying to get a very focused reading experience. Somebody in the Discord, I think today, said something funny, which was that they had a theory that the small size of the devices actually leads to better concentration, because you're only looking at this like incredibly small window of text and you're not panning your head side to side or looking up and down. You have to like really hyper focus on it. And there is something magical about that experience that we don't want to lose by having games and other things on it. And there's firmwares for that. There's firmwares that have chess. There's firmwares that have Sudoku, and there's Writer Deck, firmware that's out there. That is great. We encourage everyone, if you want to go use those things, use that. CrossPoint will always maintain being just about a core reading experience. And so, yeah, nothing to publicly say about that meeting just yet. It was really awesome. I super enjoyed meeting the team. This was not a corporate conversation. This was a collaborative, earnest, passionate conversation between myself and them. It was so awesome, kind of peeling the veil back a little bit, seeing the people behind it, learning a little bit about upcoming devices, about roadmap items, how collaboration might work out between us, hearing their woes. I had a really great opportunity. Henry was so awesome to just ask, like, what is the perception of the company right now? What could we do better? Like, how can we change, public perception? And so I was able to ask him a lot of really great questions and, push some, internal agendas like this would be better if we could do it this way, or please put a front light on the next device. That's going to be so critical. And so having that opportunity to steer, product direction was really neat. So yeah, really great meeting. And I think we'll have some big announcements coming soon.
Great. One last question, very short one. Did they reach out to you, or did CrossPoint reach out to them?
So I think a little bit of both. I have a feeling that they had tried to get in touch with Dave in the past, and he just hadn't been active on Reddit, or maybe they didn't have his email or something. I think there was probably a little bit more effort that could have been done. But they posted something on Reddit, and I replied within like seconds and said, "Hey, we would like to be involved as much as we possibly could. Please reach out." And Henry DM'd me within minutes. And I was like, "Hey man, like I'm, the new owner of CrossPoint. I would really love to talk to you guys." And his response was, "Oh, that would be really great. We've been wanting to talk to you." So, I don't know where wires got crossed in the past. Maybe they didn't think it was appropriate to open a PR saying, "Please contact us." You know, again, it's not a company, so there's no like official way to contact us. But I replied. He immediately got back to me in DMs and said, "We would love to talk. Let's set something up." And it was less than like a week later that we had a call. So it was a really fast turnaround time.
Awesome. I think it's really important that like the Western world is somehow how to say like represented like in this development, because I also think that it was sort of a bad communication from their side. But as you said, it's just they have a completely different audience and they think about completely different cultures and stuff. So I get that, yeah. So yeah, that was it for my questions. Do you have any last words, or maybe you can tell people where they can find you on GitHub or YouTube or whatever?
Yeah, no, I would say that number one, crosspointreader.com. That's where you're going to find all the latest information. You can build custom fonts for the SD card feature that we now have in the latest release. We are going to get a release out here shortly, 1.4 release candidate. I think probably next week should be available. So look forward to that. A lot of improvements on speed, ghosting, performance, tons of memory optimizations. That's been really the focus on this release, has been less about features and more about performance and fixes. So that should be going out next week. We'll put a beta up on the website that everybody can download. Um, if you do have a feature request or something that you've noticed is off, please submit a GitHub issue. We do have a really active Discord community as well that you can join. Um, and in general, we want to hear from you. We want to hear feedback. I hear a lot of people saying like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't, I don't want to inconvenience you with this bug report." We're like, no, no, no. Please tell us. There's only so many EPUBs that I can run on my device to try and figure it out. And so, we really do support, and appreciate the community coming in and being able to report all these things. So yeah, stay involved, guys. We love, interacting with all of you. If you do have a locked device, the OTA unlocker is available on the CrossPoint website. Please keep in mind that you need to have Wi-Fi on whatever device you're using. So a laptop is usually preferred. If you do have any issues with that, please open up a GitHub issue. There is a link right above the unlocker tool that goes to the open source version of the unlock tool, not of CrossPoint, but just the unlock tool. You can open an issue there. I usually patch that stuff within 24 hours. So, keep those communication channels open. You can find me at jmitch.com, jmitch.com. I've been taking requests for 3D prints for X3 and X4 cases as well. There is a send me money button and a make me do something button right on the website. And if anyone wants to meet with me, there is a meet with me button on the website as well. I kept it pretty simple. So super appreciate, giving me this opportunity to talk to the community, man. I've had a blast chatting with you today.
Thank you.